and in the draft to make it more simple to understand.
So in effect, we have adopted drafts that are pointing or ones are references to not yet adopted drafts. So if we don't adopt them, then two things: we'll have to revert those changes, and then two, we don't have a solution for people lives. So I don't think you need to say all that, but
if it comes up,
then I'm hoping everyone is super happy.
It's 9 o'clock.
Do you want to kick off? Or do you want to speak?
We can. Oh, as far as the slides are concerned.
What do you want to kick off?
Good morning. This is the Netconf working group meeting. Let's get started. We have the note. Well, most of you should already be familiar with it. Basically, anything you say or discuss in this working group has to comply with the rules of the IETF. More details are available at the link at the bottom.
So the blue sheets are passing around. If you can please add your name to them. This is how the working group gets an awareness or understanding of how many participants are in the room, so the IETF can plan the size of the room for the next time's meeting. There is, of course, the audio. The Meet Echo is being. Is there anybody on Meet Echo? Yeah, so we have a couple folks on Meet Echo. And of course, there's a virtual microphone, so you can come to the virtual microphone to speak there. Typically, or in past, well, actually forever, it's been the case that we've asked for Etherpad note takers, but we're not going to do that this meeting or any. Well, we don't. Instead, we've found that transcribing the YouTube video audio and then repairing it to get a perfect transcription is much more effective than actually having people take Etherpad minutes. So we're no longer going to be taking Etherpad minutes, but we do need a Jabber scribe. So if somebody could please volunteer to be on Jabber and scribe, do the Jabber scribe. Well, can somebody volunteer to be Jabber scribe? I don't see anybody asking. We cannot start the meeting until we have a Jabber scribe. So. Okay. But you'll keep working on it, or you're completely stuck? Okay. Okay, so we'll have to ask for support to see if there's actually a problem with the Jabber. But we do have Meet Echo working, so we can at least we can go forward with that. Oh, you still have the minute taker Etherpad in here. I thought we said we weren't going to do that.
Yeah, well, maybe we can.
Anyway, all right. So that's it for there. Okay, so since last time's meeting, we have published a number of RFCs. There's RFC 8525, which is Yang Library, RFC 8526, which is the Netconf extensions to support the NMDA, and RFC 8527, which is the RESTconf extensions to support the NMDA. This is a major achievement. The working group should be very proud of their accomplishment, and I'd like to sort of kick off a round of applause to everyone.
All right, so as for the status of the chartered working group items, the Yang push suite of drafts, they were sent into ISG, and currently I believe the last status update was a last call has been issued on the whole suite of drafts. And I guess ISG will be picking up and providing reviews, so the authors should be prepared to respond to those comments.
I think I even saw a security directorate review from this morning on one of the drafts.
The Netconf RESTCon client-server suite of drafts that Kent will be talking about is still work in progress. We'll get a status update from him and decide the next steps. The UDP pub channel draft, we received some pushback in IETF 103 on the draft. So for now, we have put it on hold, and with the ultimate intention that we want to replace it with the multiple streams draft. But let's see what the work group thinks about that. The Yang push notification draft is also work in progress, and the Yang push notification messages is not going to be presented, but is work in progress. So here's the agenda for today's meeting. We have, of course, a whole suite of drafts that are working group items, but there are 2 new drafts that Kent will be presenting that we probably will take a roll call on to figure out whether we want to adopt them as work group items or not.
And this particular presentation is now 15 minutes, not 10 minutes.
The only other item on the chartered item list is, of course, the Yang push notification capabilities. We have 2 drafts that are non-chartered items, both the subscription to multiple streams originator that we just referenced, and the NMDA backward compatibility draft, so which the presenters will be talking about. Right. So just as a note, you may have already received the second half of this meeting is going to be given to the NetMod working group for them to present there, and the chairs will talk about what they will be discussing in this session when they come up. That's the second half.
I think that's it for the chair slides. Any comments about the agenda before we get started? All right, let's get started. And we're ahead of schedules. That's good. Okay, hi, I'm Kent, and this is one of my co-authors, Wang.
Hai Guang. Yeah.
Oh, certainly. Say your name.
Yeah. My name is Hai Guang Wang from Huawei.
Hawang has been helping with the cryptotypes draft, and he'll be helping me present that part of this presentation. So there's a number of drafts here. I know it looks like a lot, but there's really just a couple issues that we've been whittling down on, and we're again going to talk about them, the same 2 issues that we talked about, IETF 103. So there's the normal set of drafts, and Mahesh just mentioned, and then there's a couple 2 new drafts that we discussed wanting to introduce in IETF 103, and so those will be presented here for the first time. Can you help me, Mahesh?
Sure.
Okay, so just quickly, I don't want, this is my only status slide, but since IETF 103, all the drafts were updated as a set. Progress is made on the 2 issues that were discussed before, and this presentation just focuses on those 2 issues, plus a few additional issues that have surfaced. And we're first going to beginning discussion 1 about finalizing the cryptotypes identities. So pass it to Hwang.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hai Guang from Huawei. Actually, co-author of this crypto draft, crypto types draft. This slide shows the changes we made in the last 2 months. The main changes are actually we adding 1 more categories and change the name of asymmetric key encryption to asymmetric key algorithm. For the details, please refer to the draft itself. This slide shows the current status of the crypto types. We actually classify the crypto algorithm into 7 classes, including hash, asymmetric key, algorithm, and so on. So I would like to ask 2 questions to the floor. The first is there any suggestion to the classification of the algorithm? That means is the current algorithm classification method is good, or there is a better method. Second is is there a new category to be added in the classification? That's what I have for this crypto type of draft. Thank you.
Just to clarify that, there's a number of base identities that are on the screen here in blue, and I think the question is whether or not those are the right set of base identities, if there should be more or less of them.
Thank you.
Raja Hotka, I have a question related to the recent discussion about the deprecated status. So what's going to happen if, let's say, a cryptographic algorithm is compromised? So what is the supposed sequence of events after that in terms of updating the module or something like this?
I'm sorry, where did we land on that? The status statement, is it possible to put?
Apparently that algorithm is not recommended to be used after that point. So I believe that the Yang module should somehow also take this into account.
Right, what I'm asking is syntactically, can we put the status statement as a sub-statement to the identity statement?
What's probably going to happen in an INR registry, in the corresponding INR registry, is that this algorithm will be labeled as deprecated in INR terms. But since apparently deprecated means something else in Yang, this could be a problem, I believe, because currently the discussion was that deprecated items basically must be implemented anyway. So.
Okay, so first off, I think you're saying that right now the draft would be published with status current, and then as and when INR deprecates an algorithm, we would have to republish the module with status deprecated. But then to your point,
but my point is that it really doesn't work the way that's probably expected. That
there's
this
a
algorithm will not be used anymore.
Deprecate means, but I think that we would move forward with calling it deprecate because of the Yang versioning rules that we're adopting, and then we could then do a subsequent update to move it to obsolete to match the full definition of INR, and in the interim, implementations could do a deviation module to say that they
you cannot deviate an identity. That's another problem, of course.
Okay. Cannot deviate an identity. Okay. So I don't think we have that as a Yang next issue, do we?
Yeah, we can discuss it during the discussion of that issue we have, but I think it's especially important for these kind of things that we have here.
So Martin Björklund, about not being able to deviate an identity. I mean, you don't have to implement all identities in a module, right? And we have an issue with that. How do you actually tell the client which identities you have implemented? So that is a Yang next issue. So I think that part is being covered.
Okay.
And also we're talking about going directly to obsolete. So maybe in this case, it would make sense to go directly to obsolete.
Can you speak a little bit louder to the microphone?
Yeah. So in this case, it might be, the correct thing might be to go directly to status obsolete in the Yang module.
Actually, the problem, Raja Hotka again, and the problem is not only about identities, which may be solved in a way that Martin mentioned, but some such types can be defined as enumerations, and in this case, this is clear that it can't work the same way as for identities.
Hi, Frank Xia, Huawei. I'm also the co-author of the crypto type documents. So I'm trying to answer this gentleman's question. Actually, when we update this document, we have considered that, of course, the crypto algorithms will will develop, and some of them will be deprecated. So what we covered or what we have written in this crypto type document, we can guarantee that they are all the most widely used and most robust algorithms we listed there. We don't include some deprecated ones such as MD5 or 3D something. That's our promise. But we also noticed that with the time go on, yes, this some of the algorithm will be old and will not be safe. So actually, I think with maybe Kent has some solution for this. Maybe we can update it based on the version, young version mechanism to solve this problem. Yeah. I hope that I can answer your question. We do have considered these things.
Balázs Lengyel Eriksson. Actually, I have a question to the previous slide that you want to introduce 2 new drafts. I'm not against these drafts, but I would be unhappy if that would delay the base drafts, which are very much needed urgently. Will it delay or?
Yes, the 2 new drafts that they'll be in the second discussion. We're right now on the first discussion, so can you hold that comment until then? Can you go back to the next slide, please? Yeah. So on the first question, is there any suggestion for regarding the classification of the number of base identities that are currently being defined? Are they sufficient? Should there be more or less? So far, I've not heard any responses to that particular question yet. Is there anyone having a suggestion for? Okay, I think, so my own, as a contributor, I find them to be sufficient. They're currently being used by a number of the SSH and TLS, we started this because we were trying to use them for the purpose of the SSH and TLS drafts. We need to ensure that gets completely implemented, but so long as that's done, then from our own consumption perspective, they would be sufficient. The chairs will ask for early sector review of this draft, since it's so heavily enthralled in security concerns. So we'll also get that level of review from security director. Okay, great. All right, thank you. Okay, so beginning discussion number 2, which is the adding support for TCP keep alives. If you recall, this was the same discussion we had at 103. At that time, and actually even currently, the current adopted solution is as it is on the screen. You can sort of see the relationship of all the different groupings between the drafts. And then at 103, I had this slide on the screen, which was a proposal for maybe having a TCP client server draft as well as an HTTP client server draft as well as an HTTPS client server draft. And we talked about that, and there was general consensus in the room that this was an approach that people wanted to see taken forward. But actually, when I got into it, I found that there's an even easier way of doing it, which is what's currently published. So there's just the TCP and HTTP. There is no HTTPS because you can see that the RESTconf client server is using the groupings from both the TLS as well as HTTP. If you had an application that just wanted to be HTTP, then it would use the groupings from TCP and HTTP. So you can, the application that's being the consumer of the groupings can decide the stack of protocols that it's trying to use. To sort of go into that a little bit more, I'm sort of following the good, bad, and ugly triple here. I kind of view this as the HASA versus ISA object-oriented relationship. I think this is good. It enables the application level modules to compose the stack of user statements. So for instance, if you're an HTTP client, you would use the TCP client and the HTTP client. If you're an HTTPS client, you would use the TCP client, the TLS client, and the HTTP client. If you're an HTTPS call home client, you use the TCP server and the TLS client and the HTTP client. So you can build your stack based on what kind of client or server you are. So that it's very flexible. Also, this being the HAZA versus IZA avoids what's I've learned originally as being called devil's diamonds. This is old Scott Meyer's Effective C++ book. But basically, it's a multiple inheritance problem where if you're using groupings from two different sources, but each of those groupings are using a common grouping, then you can possibly get the same set of definitions more than once, which is not what you really want. So by using this HAZA approach, it avoids devil diamonds, and you don't have that. Okay, so that's the good. The bad. Top-level grouping nodes are in the same namespace and thus may conflict. So in order to demultiplex the node names, oh, sorry, there's a question, Mike.
Stupid comment.
Go back.
The color, no, Dan Bogdanovich, the color schema is unreadable if you're not really close to here.
Ah, okay.
So,
yeah, so I recently upgraded to Mojave and went to the dark mode.
For example, I can barely like grouping this something blue then green.
Oh, this
it's really hard to read.
The projector is also kind of dull. Sorry about that. All right. Well, everyone, move closer to the room, front of the room. Okay. So again, to demultiplex the names, you can do one of two things. You can either prefix the top-level node names, such as, for instance, having the grouping TCP client grouping. There's leaf remote address, which is not prefixed. There's container TCP dash keep alive, so that one is prefixed by TCP dash. And then I have an example, any data TCP dash foo. And then for TLS client grouping, I have as example TLS dash keep alive. So you see it's prefixed by TLS dash and then HTTP dash. So that's basically prefixing each top level node inside the grouping. So that's option one. Option two is instead to wrap the entire contents of the grouping inside of a container, which the container is prefixed, but then it enables all the individual nodes that were previously top level to not have to be prefixed. So that's the, I don't think this is a big issue. We just need to decide which approach we want to take. Currently, the drafts are using approach number one because I kind of backed into it and that's where it was at the time, but very willing to switch it to approach number two if anybody prefers that. Any comments? Okay. I'll take that one to the list. And the ugly. Okay, so should the Netconf, RESTconf models also follow the HAZA pattern? Do we care about possible protocols built on top of Netconf and RESTconf? So currently we have TCP, HTTP, TLS, and SSH. They're all basically these little groupings that are encapsulating the configuration parameters for a single socket, right? But then we have the Netconf and RESTconf, which are more. They're not just a single socket. They're more like a list of devices or a list of endpoints. So presumably we could isolate that which is configured per socket or session from the larger multi-socket, multi-session model supporting, for instance, listen and call home. So I'm thinking what we could do, okay, let me be clear. Currently the grouping, if you were to do an instance of the grouping of the Netconf client, client protocol, yes, grouping, Netconf client grouping, what you get is something that can either have make a connection to a list of endpoints or act as a call home recipient, right? We could keep that grouping, but also have another grouping which really is just representing a single Netconf client and the configuration parameters for it. So it'd be very skinny, like Netconf session timeout might be the only configurable parameter there, right? It's very small, but it's really just the configuration parameters for a single Netconf session. And then that grouping could be used by the larger grouping. So if you wanted to, if a higher level application wanted to compose its own stack and somewhere Netconf was in that stack, but it's not necessarily the end of it's not the top of the stack, they would have the ability to compose their stack. So that's the suggestion or thought here. Would people like to see the Netconf and RESTconf models also follow this HAZA pattern?
Tim Carey, Nokia. So I think there's some value to this, particularly when we talk about proxies. Like if I had a proxy between, an example would be a proxy between a RESTconf and a Netconf. So I think there's some usage here that probably would make sense that we incorporate.
Thanks, Tim. So actually, with proxy, and I'm thinking when you said that, I'm thinking HTTP proxy. No, not HTTP. So they're inside while you're stepping back to the microphone, inside the HTTP client server model. In fact, there is one of the configurable parameters as a proxy. So if the HTTP client wanted to connect, it can connect directly to the endpoint or via a proxy.
No, I was referring to an application layer gateway between a Netconf and a RESTconf.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, moving on. So that was the end of discussion number 2.
So before we move there, one note as far as the Etherpad link in the agenda is concerned, it's not the correct one. I just sent one on the Netconf mailing list. Use that if you want to provide any comments. There are people who are writing notes in Etherpad. And so before we move to discussion number 3, the question for the working group is that I think in 103 there was kind of a poll taken to figure out if there was interest in working or adding 2 more drafts into the stack of drafts that you have, specifically to address the question of TCP and HTTP. Keep alive. Yeah, thank you. So the question for the working group is there enough interest in the working group to maybe start an adoption call for those 2 particular drafts that are not work group items as yet? A show of hands if you feel that there is enough interest in the working group, or if you think that you would want to see that work done in the working group. All right.
Same question was asked in 103, and there's large consensus in the room that they wanted to go this approach.
So maybe specifically asking, do we want the problem of TCP keep alive to be resolved using these 2 drafts? Yeah, that would be the next step. Okay. If there is no support for it, is there any objection? Right, no objection either. I guess then we'll have to go back to 103, and also, of course, we have to anyway formally do this on the mailing list. So we can try to send the poll out and see if there's any support.
Did anybody read the drafts? TCP and HTTP drafts?
Actually, that's true. That's the first question. That should have been the first question.
Yeah, so no one read it. So hence the lack of participation. All right, so we're going to have to take that to list. But nonetheless, 103, it was effectively the support was given there. And this is just basically fulfilling the promise or whatever, the agreement we made before. Yeah?
It's Wolfgang Ryder. One question. So we see in the web scale a big adoption going towards Quick. So do we have any thoughts around maybe moving also in the direction of Quick, and we will combine all the benefits of getting Quick in terms of security, round-trip times, whatever? Or is it so? I'm just asking if there are any thoughts around Quick using this in this context.
There's nothing explicit, but I'd be very open to understanding how it might change. So, I mean, I know Quick is a variation of HTTP, and so it'd be kind of like, how can we parameterize the HTTP model? Yeah. And for that matter, currently the HTTP model doesn't make distinctions between 1.1, 1.2, 2.0. So maybe we need to think about that. So please, maybe you can send a message to the list and we'll take it up there.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, when you come up to the mic, please enunciate your name so Robert here can take some notes.
Okay. So in the course of making these updates, I kind of unsurfaced a few issues. First is protocol-specific parameters are per socket, which can lead to some redundancy in the model. So for instance, the TCP keep alive must be set for each client and server. If you're configuring a Netconf client or a server and connecting to a number of endpoints, each of those endpoints have to have their TCP keep alive configuration settings set for each one of them, because it's like that's the way the model's working. We've okay, so to be fair, this is inherent in any list of like items. So anytime you have a list of items, it's not unique to these models at all. If you have a list of items and there's redundant, information across them, this can happen. Proposed fix is to do nothing and instead wait for a TBD templating mechanism. At some point, somebody should, the working group or perhaps NetMod, should define a mechanism to enable some snippet of configuration to be applied to set groups or more than one instance of another model, and then that would allow for common configurations to be factored out, defined once, and then applied to the subset of the particular list entries that are inheriting it. This, in fact, is one of the issues in Yang Next, number 18, which currently has importance medium, which is to effectively reproduce Juniper's applied groups statement, which does this. Any comments about this particular issue? Okay, second issue. The keep alive config may be present for periodic connections currently. I don't know if people remember, but a while back we previously removed the keep alives from periodic configurations. We stated that, well, periodic connections are by definition periodic, so you don't need keep alives to keep them up. You only need keep alives for persistent connections. So we removed the keep alive configurations from periodic connections. But now the way the model is, the keep alives are being configured at the socket level. And so it's being configured at the socket level regardless if it's a persistent connection or a periodic connection, which is kind of unfortunate. However, I think as I was creating these slides, I was thinking to myself, the proposed fix, we could use a must statement where we say, the keep alive configuration must not be configured when you're configuring a periodic connection, something like this. Yes? Okay. Next issue. Are all the protocol-specific keep alive models correct? So, Tim, I don't know if you've looked at them, the various configurations, but so currently the TCP keep alive configurations are very much like the POSIX keep alive mechanism. There's the three tuple of values, but then there's the SSH keep alives and the TLS keep alives and the HTTP keep alives, and each of them may be a little bit different because each protocol has a different way of supporting keep alives. So I think TCP is okay. I actually modeled it directly off of POSIX, but the others I'm a little bit uncertain. If anybody's looked at them, has concerns. Good to hear.
Tim Carey, Nokia. No, we hadn't had a chance to look at them yet, but we will, because I think they're looking at, instead of augmenting the keep alives, to actually use the draft now. So if you remember, we had some augmentations in there before in the BBF, and now they're...
Well, that was before, yeah. If we go with this approach, we no longer need to do that.
Absolutely. They know that. They just haven't looked at all the keep alives yet to give you a response.
Okay. Okay, good. Number 4. Is there any desire for other protocol-specific configurations? So, for instance, HTTP proxy settings. Currently, the groupings are per socket configurations. I'm trying to keep it to be the minimum necessary for what we need, which is really transport related. So I'm not trying to configure every possible knob on an HTTP server or an SSH server. I'm just trying to keep it to the bare minimum. But I do think, for instance, HTTP proxy settings, is a very common thing for a client to need to, for instance, to go out through a proxy. So that's kind of transport related. I feel like maybe that's an example of one that we should add. Anyway, I don't know if anyone, well, since no one's read the drafts, you probably don't have suggestions about what might be missing, but just be aware that we're going to have a conversation about, there might be some issues missing. HTTP proxy is one that I'm thinking about right now. I don't have any others in mind, but if other people are looking at it and you think that there's something missing, please let us know. 5, not all HTTP auth schemes are currently defined. So if you look at the HTTP draft, specifically HTTP supports 6, I think, authentication schemes. There may be more, sorry, there might be more, maybe 8. And I've only actually defined currently the configurations for 3 of them. I think the remaining of them are just these little fix me comments. There's actually 0 content within the container definition. It just ran out of time. So if you're looking at it and wondering what's going on, that's why. 6, why do we have special breakout groupings again? So I think everyone probably saw the email thread I had on list just recently with Balaj, the other Balaj from Ericsson. And so I think the net result of that is that we're no longer needing to have adopt them. Then we just need to finalize the few questions I've mentioned in the last couple slides. A lot of them I had the answers for already, and some of them were just process questions. So it should all move very quickly, I would imagine, hopefully before Montreal.
Right. So we'd ideally like to see if we can get at least a subset of these drafts ready for working group last call.
Absolutely. So it's the same. The first 3 drafts could be in last call in maybe a month's time, assuming the cryptotypes draft is ready.
Okay.
Blush.
Hello, I'm Balázs Nandya from Ericsson, and I'm presenting this draft, which was in work group. It's a work group draft for more than 1 year, but actually it was sleeping in a way because we had other more important things to do, not really Yang push. And now I'm trying to restart the work. It is needed stuff, but yes, it is based on the Yang push, so that has to be first. The base problem was that Yang push has the on-change capability notification, so you notify the change whenever it happens, immediately, but that's a very difficult proposal for some reasons. You might have counters that change every microsecond, you might have meaningless changes, or many times you need to implement schema node by schema node by schema node, one by one, that on-change notification capability, and it will take time for that to happen. So practically, even if we declare that we generally support on-change notifications, in practice that doesn't mean that any single object is really supported in that way, which is, yeah, if it's a contract, then we should say yes or no, not that generally yes, maybe not. So after some debates, I defined the Yang model to document these notification capabilities. Basically, it documents on whether generally and for each specific schema data node on-change capabilities are supported or not. To make this, we don't want one indication for each data node, so practically we have a default on the top level, which means that generally I support on-change notifications for config and or for state data. Config and state in many implementations are handled differently. And if there is some specific part of the data store that doesn't follow this default values, then that might have an own specification whether it supports on-change notifications or not. I'll have an example later on, but the 2 principles to reduce the number of markings is that we have a top-level default, and the support or not support is inherited down the containment tree. Also, we have some other capacity-related capabilities that are not related to on-change, but generally to Yang push. And the idea is that, yes, these should be available online, RESTconf, Netconf, but also for management system, we need this data early, before the nodes are implemented or before the nodes are bought. So Yang instance data would be the vehicle for that. This is the data model. Top part are the general capacity-related items. What dampening period we can support, how many objects per update. So how much notifications can the server really push out? The other one is the 2 default. The lower part is about on-change notifications. One for config, one for state, and this on-change notification capability list is for each node. You can specify that, yes, generally it is supported, practically for this specific part, not. There have been some changes since the last IETFs, added more capabilities. Yeah. We can debate whether these are the exact capabilities that notifications need. I'm open to any suggestions. These are the ones I could read from the standard, and that seemed logical. Okay. Oops. Doesn't go. Come on,
Oh, that's the last slide.
No, it's not.
Oh, it says it's of 6.
Sorry, but what I sent you had more slides.
Oh. Did you guys send us more than one thing?
Yes.
And was this one of the ones?
This is included in both. In one of them, I have, I think, 1 more slides, and the other 3 more slides. Sorry? Anyway.
Just a second.
Yeah. Sorry for sending it late, but I got some very good comments yesterday from here.
Okay, all I have is 6 myself.
Okay.
I think, unless I messed up, there should be more slides. The main point is that this mechanism that having default values on and that having multiple values that indicate specific part of the models work this way or that way, that seems somewhat complicated. I promised to some of you that I'll add examples in the slides and in the draft to make it more simple to understand. One point is that what categories do we have for the support or non-support? One was an open issue that do we need separate indications per data store? So some ones there is that their implementation will support notifications, on-change notifications on the running data store, but not on the candidate. Yes, I can accept that, and then that will be added to the data model that you can have general capabilities for all data stores, or you can have it per data store separately. The other was that this logic that default, maybe then one container says that, let's say, I say that default is support on change, but the next container says, I don't support on change on statistics because that's difficult. And then maybe under that, I say that the default was support. The statistic container said no support, but on specifically 1 or 2 counters, I do support it. So these 3 levels of, let's say, the default container or list that contains it, and maybe on the individual leaf will be explained. The main purpose of this is that we don't want a 100-item long list of individual nodes that support it, doesn't support, doesn't support. So you need to have this hierarchical, and also that the default value, whether it is, I support on-change notifications for everything, and yes, there might be some exceptions. That is the case for some of our implementations. Let's say I don't support on-change notifications for in-octets counters because that's too difficult. That might be the case for some. Some others, my company, but others as well, said that no, on-change notifications are important, but somewhat difficult, at least for state data. So for each group of counters, state data, each group of individual items will indicate separately when we start supporting on-change notifications. So the default in one case would be support for everything, and then some exceptions. In the other case, default for nothing, but yes, support for some exceptions. Yes, questions?
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So here, if I understand the proposal here correctly, this is something that's running on the box, and you can query it and it gives you information about what the subscription properties are, effectively what the rates are.
Yes.
Have you considered doing this off the box using instance data to make that information available at design time rather than runtime? Is my first question.
My answer would be yes. That's why I want the instance data draft. So anything where you have a Yang model that represents potentially capabilities, that you can have the same data in an instance draft that will tell you what they designed.
Okay. And then the second question I have is that in here you build up a parallel structure that represents the properties of what can be, what the subscription rates and things are. I wonder whether how easy that's going to be used, and whether it'd be easier to have like an RPC mechanism or something that allows you to query a particular path and say, what's the subscription properties for this path? So it's a different mechanism. I'm not sure it works, but it's just a thought.
I think you do need this data model because of the offline need.
Yes.
And I would say that's a kind of a, whatever you like, RPC or data. Generally, I prefer doing this with data, and that gives you and data is anyway needed. If you think we need some RPCs to make it more simple, we can discuss that, but I don't see the need. Thank you.
So I'm Benoit Kless. As we discussed yesterday, Balázs, but I want to make sure I repeat this for the group. There are 3 different use cases. The first one is that an entire data store is on-change capable. So we want to be able to write this. The second one is a specific schema node, which is on-change capable. Like, okay, we want to be able to do this. But the next one is also, all right, so I've got some counters. They're on-change capable, but only for some specific interface types, which means that now it's not only schema specific, it's instance specific. And we need to have the flexibility to have those 3 use cases.
My draft doesn't support data stores yet, I will add that. And we have this node instance identifier that was borrowed from access control, which allows you to specify the key values if you want, but it allows you to omit the key values, meaning all values. So I think after data store update, it will be supported, what you like.
Very good. That's why I mentioned that it should be stressed out in the text, but also it would be helpful with some examples.
Eric Voigt, Cisco. I'm definitely a fan of this work. This is very good. One thing that it would be good to explain a little bit more is the max number, trying to figure out if it's for all updates, whether it's for a certain type of interface sets, whether it's for different parts of the data store would be good. So I don't have any strong opinions on what it should be, but just additional description on max number would be good.
I think the model, when it goes into let's say, for your example, interfaces, that will handle the different parts of the data store, different parts of the model, or I'm not understanding what you would like.
We can chat offline, but the more description there would be good.
Okay.
Martin Björklund, so a comment to Benoit's question about being able to do this for instances. So you said that it can be done with the current data model, and I agree, but it doesn't really work for offline stuff, right? You can't really have all the instances in the offline document.
I think I don't understand why not. You can.
Well, you don't know all the instances.
Yes.
Before.
So if it's
because they will be created
per plugged-in interface, then yes, you don't know what will be plugged in.
Probably you don't really need this per instance, but sort of in this case per interface type, right? And that could potentially be documented offline. Not with the current solution, but it sounds like it could be done.
You could build this out to a full-blown filter mechanism like XPath or subtree, but I think that would be an overkill. You could also say that for the key values, I allow regular expressions. For example, interfaces are ETH/whatever, but then not everyone will have that convention. So I don't see a solution that would make me happy.
We need to cut the line.
Yeah,
Is there anything more?
So yeah, we can continue this discussion, but I think it's important to note that what Benoit asked for is actually not really possible with, at least not if you want to do this offline as well with the current solution.
Benoit speaking. Actually, there are two use cases for the instance draft in Balázs. There is like, I need the instance at the design time. And I agree with you, Martin, that there is no way to know about instances. And there is like a second use case for instance, which is I don't want to provide it like with a Yang module on the server, but it will be offline. This one could potentially be solved. But again, in that situation, I agree it's way easier to do it with a Yang module on the server.
Rashad Rahman, Cisco. So Balázs, I just wanted to mention the comment I sent you by email yesterday. My understanding is this would be very useful if it's unchanged capable itself. If that path is not unchanged capable, it's not as useful because then you need to, yeah. So it's perfectly fine to have that actual data to be in as a node selector in the data which is being returned.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. We really need to move on. So, thanks.
And if Taran can come up now.
Hello everyone, I'm Tian Zhou from Huawei, and I'm going to talk about the solution on subscription to multiple stream originators. And this is the distributed extension to the existing Yang push solution, and it provides a distributed data collection mechanism that allows multiple data streams to be managed by a single subscription. And per working group discussion, this will support. This will be transport independent. And we identified two use cases. One is the data collection from devices with mainboard and line cards. We see existing Yang push solution consider only one push server residing in the mainboard. So data are collected from the line card and aggregated in the mainboard so that the mainboard could be easily become the bottleneck. So we request distributed data collection mechanism that can directly push data from line cards to the collector. Yeah, okay. Here is another use case about the IoT scenario, and I just gonna skip it. And here is the solution overview, and I think we also introduced this last time. The subscriber will send the global subscription to the master, and the master decompose the subscription to the component subscription and send to the agent. So the agent can push data directly to the receiver. And here we have an assumption that the connection between the master and the agent already exists, and the master knows how to decompose the subscription into component subscriptions. Somebody may have interest about the interaction between the master and the agent. It would be another protocol. For example, for the agent registration, the agent management, but it's right now out of scope of this draft. Here, the subscription decomposition. For this, the master may need a data structure, typically a resource allocation table, to keep track of the mapping between the resource and the corresponding location of the subscription server, which commits to serve the data. And the collector need to compose the distributed publications, need to compose the data. So firstly, the receiver can recognize data records associated with one subscription according to the subscription ID. And then the receiver assembles data generated at one at the same time period based on the recording time. And then the receiver also need to know the number of component subscriptions for the integrity of the data. So we propose to add a list of publisher ID to the subscription started and subscription modified notifications. The publisher need to send the subscription state change notifications to the collector. Here we have two options. One is let each agent send its own notification to the subscriber, but we realized the collector actually do not have the detailed information about the resource and the allocation. So this information is residing in the master node. So we recommend to use master to send a notification to acknowledge the global subscription. And so all the subscription state change notifications must be delivered by the master publication channel, which is the session between the master publisher and the receiver. And when the subscription decomposition result changed, the subscription modified notification must be sent to indicate the new list of publishers. Here, to support the multiple transport, we re-examined the subscriber notification YAM model. It's already supported there, and it provides options for the transport, for the encoding, and the detailed information about the receiver. So I think it's enough for this solution to support multiple transport. And there are some other questions. Firstly, this solution is generally based on the configured subscription. Here's a question: do we need to consider the dynamic subscription? I'm not sure if the dynamic subscription concept applied here, because in principle, the subscription transport will totally different from the publication transport and sessions. And some other question like, is there any other issues need to be considered for this distributed extension for the YAM push work?
Okay, so Kent is a contributor. So first off to the first question, and I don't think so. I mean, in theory we should, but given that we're talking about line cards and a lot of data, for a dynamic subscriber to ask for that much data doesn't make a terrible amount of sense. I think you would want to configure it more, but if it can easily be done, then great. If it's difficult, then no.
So you want to see the dynamic subscription?
If it's easy to be done.
Okay, we will consider this.
And then otherwise, I think everyone just needs to be aware that what we're trying to support is that this is a notif, like from the Yang push perspective, this is just this is enabling the notif drafts to be configured, the notif transports to be configured on a per line card basis. Sorry, just quickly from the room, has anyone read the current version of the draft? Just a few. Yeah. Okay. All right, a couple questions, then we have to move on to the next.
Tim Carinokia. So I do have a couple questions because I think the draft, as you presented it now, has gone beyond elements that are in close collaboration with each other. In other words, a line card onto the master board. It sounds like you talked about some IoT nodes that actually will go across the network. And so I guess if we extend the draft beyond that enclosed ecosystem, right, then the questions come up to say, hey, how does an agent discover a master? How does a master be configured with an agent? And then I think the dynamic subscription then comes into play. So my question is that really the intent that this draft will extend past that closed ecosystem of masters and agents to a broader, say goes across the network of some sort.
Yes, I agree, and I have mentioned this in this solution overview, and we have this assumption, right? And somebody may think this belongs to another protocol for the agent management.
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So I think I echo Tim's comments there. That actually, there may be two separate problems here, and maybe they don't have necessarily quite the same solution. Generally, I think that the overall problem of getting data off line cards efficiently is a valid use case. I think that matters. People are doing that. So I think the problem that's being roughly described here is a good one to solve. I haven't read the solution draft, so I don't know whether I agree with that or not. But I do think this is an area that's worth working on.
Thank you.
Also to echo Eric Voigt, also to echo others' comments, this is an important problem. I've read the solution document. It is a reasonable solution. As for dynamic subscriptions, I agree with Kent. If we can find a way to get it in, it's useful. But the times I'm seeing it used out in deployments now is mostly for configured subscriptions.
Ignas Bagdonas, one overall comment about environment in where this is all operating. And this has been triggered by some early reviews from a transport area of the Yang push documents. What you are describing can be potentially large amounts of data exchanged over the short periods of time. You really need to look into the congestion aspects and in general, how that will operate. What is the impact from a transport perspective into this? I'm saying this just as a friendly suggestion, because if this document goes forward, it will definitely get negative reviews from a transport area. This simply needs to be taken into account.
I think this draft is now transport independent, and we firstly describe the overall solution, and we also define some extensions to the message layer or so-called application layer. So it's this draft, we are not going to touch the transport.
Let me add to that. Separately, there needs to be some new notif drafts for instance, binary transport, how to transmit. And then when we do have a binary notif, that particular notif transport could plug directly into the configuration model that he's proposing. So again, what he just said is independent of particular transport. Any notif transport that gets defined in the future could be used either for for the configured subscriptions, whether it be per line card or just to the control plane.
So that's fine, but I think this needs to be explicitly stated that, say, transport congestion and aspects are not being taken into account for reasons this and that.
Okay.
If it's not
Thank
said,
you.
make sure you said it. Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, and as far as your last question on adoption, I don't think we'll need to take that one to the list. And last presentation.
Hi, working group. This is Michael from Huawei, and today I want to introduce a document for the particular operation that were compatible with legacy devices. Why we want to propose a document? Because, as we know, the NVIDIA architecture have already be published, and the protocol extension also be published, as you know. And our product line has deployment some NVIDIA architecture, but we have faced some backward compatible issues. So we'd like to share these issues and the problem to the working group and want to solicit some comments. And if the working group agree with these problems, I think maybe we need to investigate some reasonable issue to address this. Okay, there is some assumption because the RFC 6241 is widely implemented and not be absolute. So it means that in a long time, in a period of time, there may be coexist some MDA support client, non-MDA support client, MDA server, and a non-MDA support server. And if we use if the MDA client can AMD client can use convenient operational. Can use the conventional RPC to communicate with AMD server. But on the other hand, if the non-AMD server want to drive the data from the NMDA support server, there have some problems. The first issue is how to distinguish the server, how to distinguish whether the client support NMDA or not. When the server update to an NMDA aware server, and it may need to support both AMD client and non-AMD client, and there is no standard-based way to the server to distinguish whether the client support AMD, especially. But I think this is easy to solved, because if the client, it can use a client protocol operation to distinguish. For example, if the client is sends get config, config this RPCs to drive the data, and the server can assume that the client is a non-MMDA support client. And if the client sends the get data, added data operation to retrieve data, so the server can assume that the client is support AMD.
Hey, Michael, I'm sorry, we're running really low on time. I'm just wondering, has anybody in the room, how many people in the room have read the draft? No. Okay, fair number. Okay, and did you see the email I sent this morning?
Yes, I see it.
So already I think that it's just simply driven by the kind of RPC that the client is providing to the server.
Yes, I see.
Is there anything more to say?
Yeah, I also have another two problems.
Okay.
This is another the second two issue. It's another issue is how to handle the default data. Assuming that the system config and the default config data is moving to the operational data store under the AMD server. So it's not clear whether the AMD aware server can return the same result to non-AMD client as the non-AMD aware server does. And if the working group thinks it should return the same result, so it may there may some impact on the operational, especially handle the default behavior, because the default configuration, system configuration is moving to the operational data store. So if we use a get config, for example, in report all model, the data driving on the running data store, it will be reduced without include default configuration. And if we use added data on running data store, we can create a default data configuration, because the running data store doesn't have default config. But if we want to delete the default configuration, it will be false because it moved to the operational data store. Yeah.
So Martin Merkland, I really don't understand the problem here. I think there are different RPCs, and I don't think that you can really talk about the client being non-MDA or an NMDA aware. I mean, a client that is NMDA aware might send an edit config, for example, or a get. That's fine. It's the operation that has a certain behavior. And the behavior of those operations haven't really changed with NMDA. So I agree with Ken's review, and I don't really see the problem here.
So Tim Karinoki, I will say that we're doing the same type of analysis in another organization, because we do see the problem of the permutation of different NMDA clients, non-NMDA clients against NMDA servers, non-NMDA servers, and there's some aspects that are causing some difficulties, not necessarily with the RPCs themselves, but with the interactions and the data stores, right? And so if the IETF is taking on the work of trying to figure out how to make these different permutations applicable, that will go a long way, particularly in some other SDOs that are also looking at this same problem, because it is a problem, particularly around the data stores and the associated capabilities.
Okay, so I didn't understand those issues from reading this draft. So if you have further examples or can describe the problem, I think that would really help. Just from the description in this draft, I didn't really understand the issue.
And Kent, as a contributor, perhaps what you're thinking about is the defaults are somehow in the operational data store, and therefore an NMDA server, it's not in one of the configuration data stores, and hence when you do a get config, somehow they're not available for returning or something like this. But that's not really the way to think about the default values. They're not really in the operational data store. They're just simply default values. The op state for sure is being tagged they're being tagged as default, but they don't live in the operational data store. But as Martin and I have been saying, the RFC 6241 behavior doesn't change. The API is identical. It's just an implementation that the NMDA aware server must return the response the same way as it would if it had not been an NMDA aware server. So, however,
so does it assume is agree with this assumption? Because if we want, if the non-NMDA support client to want to redrive the field data, but it can redrive the same data which the non-NMDA server supported.
Yes. So I think we'll just take this offline.
Okay.
Because it's I think we've already answered the question. Is there? Are we done?
Another slide. This is another issue. Is for how to handle the system config. Okay, here is some case. If the client want to configure IP to interface 4, and the interface is a system config interface, there is some issue because we want to configure the IP, but the interface is in the interface 4 is in the operational data store. So the client may need to create an interface 4 and then configure the IP of this interface. So this effect is similar as the feed auto-created interface. Auto-created interface configuration into running data store and make it become client-side configuration. And after this interface configuration is applied, it will be merged with another existing system configuration in operational data store.
Okay, I think we're going to stop here. So this is the same issue as before. It's a non-issue. So let's take this offline. We need a segue into the NetMod meeting now, and so if we could just switch tables. And thank you, Mahesh. Sorry for the quick turnover, but we are running late. And I'm not even sure that we were going to do 5 minutes chair slides, but I don't think. Let's not even do that. So we're just transitioning into the NetMod meeting. There was a mix-up with the agenda scheduling. Somehow they think that this is currently session 2 and not so. Or I don't know how it goes. Anyway, the slides. If you're looking online at the slides, they're not quite lined up. Just look at the other session slides and you'll see it. But nonetheless, we're going to go straight into. I think Joe Clark is the first presenter, right? So,